speaking to you tonight from behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office. In this sacred space, I'm surrounded by portraits of extraordinary American presidents. Thomas Jefferson wrote the immortal words that guide this nation. George Washington, who showed us presidents are not kings. Abraham Lincoln, who implored us to reject malice. Franklin Roosevelt, who inspired us to reject fear. I revere this office, but I love my country more. It's been the honor of my life to serve as your president. But in the defense of democracy, which is at stake, I think it's more important than any title. You know, in recent weeks, it's become clear to me that I need to unite my party in this critical endeavor. I believe my record as president, my leadership in the world, my vision for America's future, all merited a second term. But nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. That includes personal ambition. So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation. That's the best way to unite our nation. You know, there is a time and a place for long years of experience in public life. There's also a time and a place for new voices, fresh voices, yes, younger voices. And that time and place is now. I hope you have some idea how grateful I am to all of you. The great thing about America is here, kings and dictators do not rule, the people do. History is in your hands. The power is in your hands. The idea of America lies in your hands. So let's act together, preserve our democracy. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops.
Good God, that man sounds terrible. Ugh, good Lord. President Biden, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., is ending his run for a second term in office just 107 days before Election Day, after bowing to pressure from his party after a disastrous debate at the end of June where he seemed to lose his train of thought, well, over and over again. It seemed like it happened a lot. For Biden, who is 81, the June 27th debate against Donald Trump hardened the narrative that he was too old. You're too old to understand the way the game is told. That's Tupac would say. For another 4 years in the job, he insisted for 3 years that he would fight to make a comeback, but on Sunday he said that he had changed his mind, saying, I believe it's in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and focus on solely fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term. He wrote in a letter addressed to my fellow Americans posted on social media. He followed up that post by endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris as the nominee and urged his party to come together. Now his decision is coming just a month before the party's convention, but the path to ahead to November 5th is unclear, and it will be difficult to get everything organized on time. Not since March of 1968 has an incumbent U.S. president opted out of running for a second term. When President Lyndon B. Johnson, under pressure over the Vietnam War, dropped out of the presidential race during a live television address. Now that was a real president right there. Lyndon B. Johnson. Look him up. Now, what finally persuaded Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., our president, to step aside, well, he was isolating with COVID at his home in Rehoboth Beach in Delaware, when a shrinking inner circle handed him some polling data that showed that he could no longer beat Donald Trump. That was when they composed a letter saying it was time for him to step aside for the future of the Democratic Party. Donors had pulled millions of dollars in funds The list of Democrats telling him to drop out was growing by the day, and polls suggested that his chances of beating Donald Trump were dwindling after his disastrous debate performance. On Saturday evening, Biden summoned to his side the two men who have been there since his political start, his advisors Steve Ricchetti and Mike Donnellan. They have been with him through the best of time and during his early years as a senator, and through the worst of times with the death of his son, Beau Biden, in 2015. Already with the president and the first lady were their closest aides, Annie Tomasini, Anthony Bernal, who they referred to as family. It was Ricchetti and Donnellan who brought with them the devastating new data that would help to make up Joseph Robinette Biden's mind. They revealed that the latest internal campaign polling taken since the debate showed that he could no longer beat Donald Trump. I mean, look, I tried to tell you guys, there's really nobody to blame for this but the Democratic Party elites themselves. They gaslit the public for 5 years, claiming that there was absolutely nothing wrong with Joe Biden. And then he had that disastrous debate, and the Band-Aid is ripped off at that point. And they go, oh my God. And you just heard this speech there. I mean, I know he had COVID, but good God, he sounded like that during the debate. And he sounds like that all the time. And he wanders off, and he meanders, and he does a lot of things that you don't want somebody whose finger is on the red button that could kill everybody in the world does. Now, how did they plot to hide his decline? I think that's what a lot of people are wondering now. How did his inner circle for 4 or 5 years hide the precipitous decline of Joseph Robinette Biden Jr.? I think those questions are being bandied about. The media is finally deciding to be critical of Biden and his age after spending years saying anybody who criticized him was ageist or whatever, because they feel betrayed. They were told certain things by Karine Jean-Pierre. They were told things by people within Biden's circle. Oh, he's perfectly fine. Oh, you should see him at meetings. He's doing jumping jacks. He's going to elbow Trump off the top rope like he's Macho Man Randy Savage. And then now we see the truth. Now, they used a multitude of tactics to hide what was going on. They limited reporter access to him. That should have been a telltale sign for all you people out there. When they barely let him do interviews. He did less interviews than any president in modern history. They limited access to the media. How are you going to have a democracy and talk about you're saving democracy when the president can't be held accountable by the media on a regular basis? They gave the president, they had to give him smaller stairs for Air Force One and physically surround him in public to hide his walk. They also give him large print note cards with the most basic of instructions written on them for almost every event that he does. And they have to keep him on an extremely strict daily schedule so he can get more sleep. There was even an event staff that was staffed with trying to devise strategies to keep the president from falling down. Think about that. You have to have an entire staff just to keep Joe Biden from falling down in public. An ex-senior staffer who spoke on condition of anonymity said that they placed guardrails around Joe Biden. The West Wing deployed multiple strategies to explain any of his missteps and were accused of doing everything they could to cover up his decline, which they did. When he spoke, he relied heavily on the teleprompter, which I told you guys a few weeks ago. He relies on his teleprompter. Of course he can look somewhat coherent when there's a giant teleprompter telling him what to think and what to say. And most of his events were scheduled between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. because that's when he is dependably engaged. So your president is basically useless after 4 p.m. After 4 p.m. When he had the debate, all the preparations had to be done during the day, so he had time for an afternoon nap. And so as for the note cards, they would give him a play-by-play of what he had to do. Directions, simple as you take your seat. He had to be told on a note card where to sit down and when to sit down. This is what they were hiding for us for 4 years. There were donors, Democratic Party donors, who voiced concern when he would use note cards during private meetings to answer pre-screened questions. So all the questions would be pre-screened to make sure that he could answer them, and then he'd have note cards to answer the pre-screened questions. I mean, this is one of the more disgusting things that I believe we've ever seen our government do, and when it comes to lying to us. They literally lied to us. Lied to our faces for 4 or 5 years. Karine Jean-Pierre, and before that, Jen Psaki, got out there and lied to us while they knew that behind the scene, they were having to tell the man when and where to sit with note cards, and that they could not allow him to take questions that weren't pre-screened. That is absolutely disgusting. I think now you have to look at what is Joe Biden's legacy. Obviously, the war on drugs. The war on drugs is a big part of his legacy. He was a big drug warrior in the 80s. He was somebody who spent much of his time supporting, writing bills that were really damaging to poor communities, particularly poor black communities. With the irony being that millions of black people ended up mass incarcerated, even some nonviolent drug offenders, while his kids were out there wilding out. Hunter Biden and his sister, I forget what her name, Amy Biden, were out there smoking crack, snorting coke. I mean, Joe Biden's daughter was caught by the I think it was the New York Times or the New York Post, snorting coke. But at the same time, people here in the city of Gary or in Chicago, if they're caught with any drugs, that's a mandatory sentence, thanks to Joe Biden fighting for mandatory sentences for having drugs. So you have to look back at his legacy with mass incarceration. You have to look at his legacy with the banks. They used to call him the senator from MBNA. That's the National Bank of Maryland, because he was so generous to the Wall Street banks. The same banks who are buying up all of our homes and our communities, same banks that are acting as vultures to working class and poor people, destroyed millions of lives, crashed our economy in 2008, and have become even more reckless and dangerous in post to the 2008 collapse, because they're more powerful now. The ones that survived, the banks that survived now, are definitely too big to fail, thanks to people like Joe Biden. He helped create the student debt crisis with the bankruptcy bill that he supported. You know, the irony is the Bidenites or the Biden heirs, depending on, I guess, how you want to say it, talk about, well, you know, Joe Biden he canceled student debt for a lot of people. But he created a lot of that debt with the bankruptcy bill that would not allow people to get from up under that student debt. So that's a big part of his legacy. There's obviously the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. Though I definitely agreed that we needed to withdraw from Afghanistan, the withdrawal itself was disastrous. Now, that being said, that was not 100% Joe Biden's fault. I don't even know if it was half his fault. I think it was probably, I'd say 30% Joe Biden's fault. The rest of it was the fault of George W. Bush and Barack Obama and Donald Trump, the three presidents before him that sat there and watched billions of American taxpayer dollars being sunk into what essentially was a money laundering operation. You saw millions of dollars being spent to open up a gas station in Afghanistan. It was disgusting. All the while they're telling us, oh, we're helping little girls go to school. We're doing all this. We're financing these police security forces, and we're doing it. Man, they hadn't done anything. That money was laundered. That's the point of the military-industrial complex, to launder money. All these wars are about money laundering. So I would say it's about 30% his fault. He did vote for all these wars and support all these wars, but he was not president when I think the majority of the money laundering and screwing around happened. That happened under Bush. That happened under Obama. That happened under Donald Trump. So his predecessors have to eat some of that as well. Another underrated part of Joe Biden's legacy was he broke the railroad workers' strike. When they went on strike, he ended the strike. When all these people wanted was a little bit of time off and rights as workers, that was, in my opinion, a betrayal to labor. And of course, we can't get beyond helping to agitate this war with Russia in the Ukraine. As I've played the audio on this show many times, Joe Biden back in the late 90s said himself that continuing to expand NATO eastward was a provocative act that Russia would react negatively to. He said that back in the 90s. So he knew. Bill Clinton knew. George W. Bush knew. We know that America and its allies who make up NATO have been purposely trying to agitate and provoke Russia into World War III or into a type of World War type situation because they want to break up Russia and take its assets, just like they do in Africa, just like they do in the Middle East, just like they do around the world. And Russia's the one white people country that for some reason they feel like that's okay, that they want to be able to do that too. I don't know why they don't view the Russians as white like they view other white people as white, but I mean, those are white people problems, so that's between them. But really, this whole Russian conflict, I think we have gotten so used to paying so much more for food. I pay so much more for food now when I go to the grocery store. All the stuff I used to buy, I'll tell you the story about the hamburger patties I used to always like to buy. I'd buy them for $7.99. At the beginning of 2022, I'd buy them for $7.99. Now they're $13. Everything. Rice costs more. Oatmeal costs more. Hot dogs cost more. Bread costs more. Eggs cost more. All this stuff costs a lot more than it did at the beginning of 2022. A big part of that was because Russia was basically supplying much of the world with oil. And when you take Russian oil off that market to Europe, and you tell Europe they can't have that cheap Russian oil anymore, and we blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, which we did do that. That's sort of a given at this point, even though our government denied it, they were lying. And so now everything costs a lot more than it used to, especially things that we need every day. And so that's a big part. If we end up in World War III with Russia, the world's preeminent nuclear power, because Russia has more nuclear weapons than America and any other country, that will be a big part of Joe Biden's legacy. Immigration. 10 million people have flooded into this country. 10 million illegal immigrants have flooded into this country since Joe Biden has been in power. That is unforgivable. The black people in power. I saw the poll the other day. Donald Trump is going to win. It looks like he's winning about 20% of the black vote. That is astronomical for a Republican. I got black people in my family supporting Donald Trump, which is crazy to me. I have never met a single member of my family who ever supported anything other than a Democrat, other than myself, who's a third-party voter, as I make known to you guys every week. I've always been the only person I know who wasn't going to vote for a Democrat. Now I got multiple Trump voters in my family, and immigration is a big part of that. I tried to tell you guys, and the late, great Jonathan Booz, when me and him were together, we used to talk about immigration all the time and how the Democrats were making a huge mistake by ignoring the sort of historic legacy of Cesar Chavez, of A. Philip Randolph, of Coretta Scott King, of Barbara Jordan, even some of the good things that Bill Clinton and Barack Obama did. I always give Barack Obama props for this one thing. He deported the hell out of a lot of people. More people than anybody in the 20th century put together. That was one of the few things that he did that I totally agreed with. And I wish the Democrats would have continued to take Barack Obama's legacy, and they'd be doing a lot better with black people. I'll tell you that. If black communities all over America weren't being flooded with Venezuelans and Haitians and Guatemalans, you see in Chicago, I played the clip where people are in the streets foaming at the mouth saying, we will vote for Republicans if you guys don't stop this. Again, these are things I warned you about, and many others you have ignored. But you can ignore these things at your peril. Obviously, later in his presidency, at the end, towards the end, just a few weeks ago, a woman he hired, Kimberly Cheadle, to head the Secret Service, almost got Donald Trump assassinated. Which I mean, I don't have any proof of anything. I personally believe that was on. I think they let that happen. That's just my personal opinion. I don't have any proof, but there's just too many convenient missteps that happen, including this woman lying about how there was just the building was too sloped for them to put any Secret Service people on. That's complete nonsense. They lied. They lied. She lied, should I say. But Joe Biden hired her. And now she's had to step down after probably the biggest Secret Service failure of the last 50 or 60 years. But after all that, I will say, and I talked about this a few months ago, there's a lot of things I don't agree with about the Biden administration and with Joe Biden about. I think his legacy is largely negative. But I did a segment on this a few months ago. His appointment of Lena Khan to the Federal Trade Commission is the single greatest political appointment of my lifetime. Period. Now I'm hearing Kamala Harris might not keep Lena Khan around, which makes sense for her, the type of person Kamala Harris is. I hope that's not the truth, though. if she does indeed become the candidate and she does win, I hope she does everything in her power, short of, kidnap and torture, to keep Lena Khan as the head of the Federal Trade Commission. This woman is a one-woman wrecking machine when it comes to holding corporations accountable for exploiting the people. She is one of the very few public servants we have in American public life who actually seems to be doing her job to help the public. They have gotten rid of non-compete agreements. They've gone after the oil companies. They've gone after the banksters. They've gone after so many people that it's incredible that a corrupt, incompetent buffoon like Joe Biden would nominate somebody who's that competent and that good at her job to a spot like the Federal Trade Commission. I genuinely hope that if Kamala Harris does become the president, that she keeps Lena Khan around. It would be an absolutely devastating loss for this country if Lena Khan, if Kamala Harris got rid of her. It really would. It would be almost treasonous to change the FTC and the FCC as well. There's good appointments there. But other than that, the legacy of one Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. has been one of 50 years of corruption and nonsense and being what would be called a Democrat name only some years ago, but now unfortunately has become the mainstream of the corporate liberal Democratic Party. All right, folks, we are going to talk about who is going to replace our current president, Joe Biden, as the Democratic Party's nominee for president. We'll be right back after these.